Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. The topic of the top 10, top 10 wrestlers under 5'10". And I don't know what that is in the metric system for all our friends that are watching this in countries that use a metric system. I do apologize. Basically, it's a ranking of shorter wrestlers. I went with 5'10" because, well, first off, I'm 5'11", so these are wrestlers that are shorter than I am. Second, there seem to be a lot of wrestlers that were booked at 5'11", or that legitimately are 5'11". So to narrow that process down, I went an inch smaller. So there's guys like Adam Cole, who everything I could find on him said that he was 6 foot even. I know he's not because I've met him and I don't think he's as tall as I am. The Young Bucks are listed as 6 foot themselves. So there's going to be some wrestlers that are probably under the 5'10" limit, but I couldn't find anything to back up that they are. Everyone on this list, I found their height off of the internet, either through Wikipedia or through other web pages through Google searching. So take with a grain of salt the heights I'm going to list. I'm sure some of these are exaggerated, some may be right. I gotta imagine at least one of them is correct because there's one of them that kind of surprised me a bit. But take it with a grain of salt, the heights I'm listing here, and know that there are probably other wrestlers under 5'10". I just couldn't find anything to back it up. With all that being said, this comes to us as a suggestion from my good friend Scott. Scott, this one's for you. First up, number 10, Chris Candido, measuring in at 5'8". Chris Candido was a WWE Tag Team Champion, an ECW Tag Team Champion, a highly underrated wrestler in my opinion. He's a guy that kind of gets lost in the conversation when we talk about ECW or we talk about the new generation area. He was part of the Body Donnas with Dr. Tom Pritchard. He gets a little bit lost even in the conversation when we talk about Smoky Mountain Wrestling, where he was a big part of that company. Candido was an absolutely amazing wrestler, and the only thing that probably stopped him from being a world champion was his height limitations. There was a stigma to him that he was shorter, and I know that there's going to be some guys on this list that are short or maybe even shorter than him that won the world championship, but for some reason I think that held him back. Another thing that probably held him back a little bit was his relationship with Sunny, aka Tammy Sitch. I gotta imagine that had something to do with it, his problems outside of the ring as well. But other than that, I think Candido is an absolutely fantastic wrestler. If he could have got some more accolades, I'd probably put him higher on this list. We'll go from that, our number 9, Superstar Bill Dundee. You can't talk about Memphis wrestling without talking about Bill Dundee. He's a stalwart of that company for 20 years, whether it be when they were the USWA or CWA. He was always figured in as a main event star, whether it be face, whether it be heel, whether it be teaming with Jerry Lawler or fighting against him. His matches with Lawler, guys like Austin Idol, Dutch Mantell, were absolutely legendary. I forgot to mention, measuring in at 5'7". Bill Dundee was definitely one of those people that when you looked at him, he didn't look like much, but when he got into the ring, he showed where he was a star. Absolutely amazing wrestler. Another one on this list, and I'm probably going to say this a billion times on this list, just a guy that maximized his talent, maximized his possibilities, became a legend. Now going from that, our number 8, Kevin Sullivan. Measuring in at 5'9", Kevin Sullivan was a terror to wrestling fans for a decade and a half, whether it be in Florida with his Army of Darkness, or whether it be in WCW with the Dungeon of Doom, or the Varsity Club. Sullivan was a master of ring psychology, one of the guys that really laid the groundwork for dipping into that spookier side of wrestling, that horror movie type themes and satanic themes, and dipping into people's fears to really make a compelling heel. I wish there was a lot more video out and available of Kevin Sullivan's run in Florida Championship Wrestling, but what's out there is absolutely fantastic, and I think you should go and check it out if you haven't yet. There's a lot of it on YouTube. Just search Kevin Sullivan in Florida. You'll find interviews, you'll find matches. Just a phenomenal heel for the time, and a great foil for the ultra babyface Dusty Rhodes. Again, just a fantastic wrestler and a fantastic mind for wrestling. I'll go from that our number 7. A man who at one point was a tag team partner with Kevin Sullivan, Taz. Measuring in at 5'9", Taz was an absolute machine of destruction in ECW. No one questioned the fact that he was one of the shortest wrestlers on the roster, because once he stepped between the ropes, he was one of the most lethal and dangerous wrestlers you ever saw. Taz was one of the first guys to really incorporate the MMA styling into pro wrestling and go with what was a burgeoning sport in MMA and UFC. It was very much in its infancy, and Taz involved that and realized that this was a way to get himself over, being that he knew judo. He would incorporate a lot of judo throws, judo choke, the kata hajime, the Taz mission, multiple variations of suplexes, which he called Tazplexes. Just an angry, vicious way to wrestle. Got himself over extremely well. Didn't do so great in WWE, but had one of the great debuts of all time, beating Kurt Angle, ending Kurt Angle's undefeated streak. After that, unfortunately, he didn't go as far as a lot of people wishes he would have. But again, in my opinion, one of the best shorter wrestlers of all time. Now going from Taz, our number 6. The original Tiger Mask, Satoru Siamo. And I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. Measuring in at 5'8", Siamo was an absolute innovator in pro wrestling. The Cruiserweight division in WCW, the X division in TNA, the influence that has on the current AEW and WWE rosters, that can all be traced back to Siamo. Siamo was doing stuff that was 20 years ahead of where they were in the early 80s. He was doing stuff that you wouldn't see guys do or replicate again for another decade and a half to 2 decades after him. Absolutely phenomenal wrestler. Innovated so many moves, innovated so much of the junior heavyweight style, the high flying, cross between lucha libre and strong style, and just mixed up in one big pot and started basically a revolution all on his own. One of the great junior heavyweights of all time, in my opinion, and a lot of others' opinions, the great Tiger Mask. I'm going from number 5. You can't talk about Tiger Mask without talking about this guy, the Dynamite Kid, measuring in at 5'9". It was hard talking about Tiger Mask without talking about Dynamite. Dynamite was the foe, the antithesis. He was a guy that kept up pace with Tiger Mask. He was a guy that was more of a mat-based version of it. Yes, Tiger Mask and Dynamite both would pull out high flying. Dynamite was more of a grappler added into that, bringing the Calgary style into that. And I will say, if you go back, I think they have 7 or 9 matches. I'm not sure the exact number. There's 7 or 9 matches that have been recorded. You can find most of them on YouTube. If you go back and watch these matches, to this day, those are some of the greatest matches I've ever seen. I mean, these guys absolutely blow everything away. It's frenetic, it's car crash, it's high flying, it's hard hitting. Everything you want in a wrestling show, you see in this one match. And then Dynamite himself would go on to have a legendary tag team with Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldogs. One of the guys that absolutely innovated everything that we see in North America. I mean, guys like Chris Benoit, Roderick Strong, Bryan Danielson. All these guys owe their career to Dynamite Kid and how he started everything. Just a phenomenal wrestler, hence why he made the list. Going from that, our number 4. You could say this next guy is the evolution of Dynamite Kid and Tiger Mask, Jushin Thunder Liger. Measuring in at 5'7", much like I said about Siamo and Dynamite, Liger was an absolute legend of the junior heavyweight divisions, whether it be the light heavyweight division in WCW or the cruiserweight division or the junior heavyweights in Japan. Liger is absolutely legendary, having great matches all over the globe for 20 years, being one of the guys that really helped to bridge that gap between North America and Japan and make a lot of North American fans of Japanese style wrestling. Just a fantastic talent, innovator of so many moves, so many legendary feuds and matches for him. Just an amazing wrestler, hence why he's this high on the list. Now going from Liger, our number 3, Rey Mysterio, hailing in at 5'6", or Rey Mysterio Jr. if you're old like myself. Rey is arguably one of the best little men that's ever done. I mean, he's probably the best cruiserweight wrestler of all time. In my opinion, Rey Mysterio, much like I said with Liger being the evolution of Dynamite and Tiger Mask, Mysterio took what Liger did and added his own lucha influence to that and became that guy for the next 2 decades. You'd be hard-pressed to find a wrestler of this generation that says at some point they weren't influenced by Rey Mysterio. Whether it be the high-flying, the colorful masks, the impossible odds, the David and Goliath storylines where he took down some of the biggest big men of all time, guys like Batista and Kane, or The Undertaker. Then he would have a phenomenal classic with guys like Malenko or Guerrero. Just a fantastic, fantastic wrestler. One of the true innovators in pro wrestling. Often imitated, never duplicated wrestlers there's been. WWE's been talking for 15 years about finding the next Rey Mysterio, and they're just not going to, because there's no other Rey Mysterio that's ever going to be out there. Now, going from that, our number 2, one of Rey Mysterio's good friends, Eddie Guerrero, measuring in at 5'8". This one surprised me a bit because I never looked at Eddie Guerrero as being shorter. He never felt like he was shorter than the wrestlers he was going against. Yeah, I mean, it was obvious when he would wrestle an Undertaker or Brock Lesnar or even a JBL, but it didn't feel like he was any shorter than a Shawn Michaels would be, or say someone like AJ Styles. It is very possible that what I found for Eddie Guerrero was his shoot height and not his announced height. He could have been announced at 5'10 or 5'11, and that could be part of my perception of why I didn't think of him as being shorter, but he absolutely was. And what can you say about Eddie Guerrero that hasn't been said already? One of the most charismatic wrestlers that's ever been in a wrestling ring. I mean, if you've seen Eddie Guerrero wrestle, you automatically were drawn to his matches. You were drawn to him. Absolutely legendary wrestler, a wrestler that was taken far too early. I believe he would have had another decade worth of great matches in him. A guy that's sorely missed now. One of the legendary wrestlers of all time. Rest in peace, Latino Heat. That being said, before we get into our number 1, we do a thing here called the best of rest. Basically wrestlers that were thought of for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, at 5'7", Coco Beware. Coco was another guy that I knew was shorter than most of the wrestlers of his time, but he didn't feel like he was that short. A lot of people deride Coco and say that he's an unworthy Hall of Famer. I definitely disagree with that. He was a guy that absolutely I cheered for as a child. He was someone that I wanted to see when he was on the television screen. He was a wrestler that put on great matches. Yeah, he may not have the championship accolades, or he may not have the legendary WrestleMania match that a lot of these other guys do, or legendary matches these other guys do. But I can guarantee you, Coco Beware sold more tickets, or as many tickets, as half these people on this list. There are plenty of kids in my generation that Coco was either their favorite or one of their favorites, and he was one of the reasons why they liked wrestling or why they wanted to get a ticket to go watch wrestling. For that, I think he's awesome. I think he's an absolute legend. That's why he was considered for the list. Last but not least, on the best of the rest, Yoshihiro Tajiri. Measuring in at 5'9", Tajiri was absolutely what his moniker said he was, a Japanese buzzsaw. He came in the ring, and to this day, he threw some of the most impressive kicks I've ever seen in wrestling. He would absolutely annihilate his opponents with roundhouse kicks, spin kicks, just amazing looking talent. I mean, everything Tajiri did had such a level of violence, such a level of impact to it, that you believed in him and you believed that what he was doing was something special. I absolutely love Tajiri, and hence why he was considered for the list but didn't quite make it. Now, before we get into our number 1, if you think I put someone too high, someone too low, let me know what you think. Hit me down here in the comments. With that being said, our number 1 wrestler under 5'10", the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, measuring in at 5'8". When the history books of wrestling are written, Bryan Danielson's going to be in that top tier of wrestlers of all time. He had a legendary run in WWE, legendary run in Ring of Honor, made it to the top of the WWE where no one expected him to, and seemingly nobody in management really wanted him to be at the top. Had a groundswell of fans just getting behind him, forcing him to have a moment. When we talk about in-ring talent, there are very few wrestlers that have ever got to the level that Bryan Danielson got to. I mean, we're talking about Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, AJ Styles, and very few others. Bryan Danielson is the ultimate babyface, and he can be a terrible heel as well. People will hate him as a heel, but there's something about him that everybody wants to get behind, whether it's his charismatic promos, his personality, his absolutely insane work ethic. Like I said, just an amazing talent, one of the great wrestlers in two separate companies. When you talk about legends in Ring of Honor, you got to bring up Bryan Danielson. When you talk about legends in WWE, you got to bring up Daniel Bryan. One of the guys that I don't think his true impact's going to be felt for another decade or two. Just an amazing, amazing talent. What can I say about Bryan Danielson that's not already been said? He is already considered one of the great wrestlers of all time, and this is why he's my number one. With all that being said, let's smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And if you made it all the way to the end, let me know who your favorite shorter wrestler is. They don't have to be under 5'10". They could be 5'11". I just gave myself that restriction so I could narrow down this list a bit. But let me know who your favorite shorter wrestler is. Put them down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.